The Exorcism of My Sister. A case by Ed and Lorraine Warren. The events narrated below may or may not be real, so I request your discretion at all times, but above all, do not let yourself be suggestible or allow dark energies into your life. Hello, dear friends. These dates are undoubtedly completely mystical, nights during which countless horror stories are told that can send shivers down the spine of anyone who dares to experience true terror. For this reason, we have saved the most terrifying experiences that have come to our inbox throughout the year, as well as the darkest investigations we have conducted during all these days, hoping to fill your nights with dread. If at any point you feel that you are not alone wherever you are, it may very well be the case. We try not to utter the names of the demons contained within this shocking story to protect you, but I cannot assure you that it will be enough to prevent you from being visited tonight or when you least expect it. If you have any medical conditions that prevent you from continuing to listen, or if you feel that this story could trigger things in your life, please come back another time. But before you go, I need your help. Leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and activate the bell for all notifications. That would help me a lot, and if you have friends who enjoy chilling stories, share this broadcast with them. Hello, dark secret community. The truth is, I'm not a good writer, but what I do know is that the events my family went through are completely terrifying, painful, and sad. I'm writing to you from the United States. Many sisters, as they grow up, hold on to pleasant, fun memories with experiences they never want to forget. That wasn't the case for us. My sister and I couldn't enjoy our childhood, and our adolescence was even worse. The reason was that ever since my younger sister turned 1 year old, a demon attached itself to her, refusing adamantly to leave her alone. When she was 3 and I was 8 years old, I began to realize what our parents were hiding from us. I had always insisted on wanting to sleep in the same room with her, but they wouldn't let us. Elena slept alone, and they always locked her room. On the other hand, they usually left the door to my parents' bedroom half open, in case my sister cried so they could hear her. At that time, I realized that something was wrong with her, but I also refused to ask. One day, while spying on my father as he said goodnight to Elena, I discovered that he left the key next to the door of her room on the outside. That's when I thought I should go see my sister sleep to find out why they locked her in alone and why they wouldn't let us sleep together. So I did. At midnight, I left my room and carefully grabbed the key they had left next to my parents' bedroom door and opened Elena's room. There she was, asleep. Her room was always neat, much neater than mine. It was obvious she was only 3 years old. I searched and checked as much as I could, but I found nothing strange in her room. There was nothing that gave me any clue as to why they locked her in here alone without any company. I even checked the clothing cabinets and the boxes of her toys, but it was all in vain. The only thing that caught my attention was that she didn't wake up despite all the noise I had made. She had a very heavy sleep, and just as I had entered, I left without any answers. I locked the door and left the key right where I had found it. The next morning, when I went downstairs for breakfast, my father asked me why I had opened Elena's room without his permission. I froze in fear, leaving no clues that could incriminate me. I was sure I had left everything in its place and had locked the door properly, or so I thought. My dad told me he found Elena's bedroom door open, and he couldn't find the key, so he had to search for the spare one he had hidden. I tried in many ways to make him understand that it wasn't me and that I had slept soundly the night before. That conversation became a bit lengthy as he repeated to me over and over again that Elena was not tall enough to open the door by herself, let alone know where the key was hidden. While I listened, I thought about that night. I was sure, absolutely sure, that I had locked the door. I thought he was testing me to see if I snuck into my sister's room, but no matter what he said, I never admitted to anything, and in the end, he just told me that if it was forbidden to enter that room at night, it was for a reason. That's when he told me for the first time. I didn't know it was forbidden to enter Elena's room at night, so I couldn't help but ask why. His response was that she didn't sleep much, and that could make her sick, so it was forbidden only to avoid disturbing her and waking her up while she slept. I immediately realized it was a lie. The night before, I had made a lot of noise, and Elena didn't even stir. It had been prohibited for another reason that he didn't want to tell me, but I was just an 8-year-old girl, not a detective. Although I was curious, Dad made me forget quickly, and it was a long time before I became curious about my sister's room again. As Elena grew up, I found a better friend in her, and if that feeling didn't grow stronger, it was because we were always kept apart. Mom and Dad didn't want us together for more than half an hour. We would always cry because we wanted to play together all day after school, but they forbade it. They would always buy us the same toys so we wouldn't need each other, but the truth was, we needed each other, no matter how materialistic the things they gave us were, because we are sisters. When she was 8 and I was 13, we decided not to listen to our parents anymore, so we took the key to her room, forcing Dad to get a copy of the key. That way, Elena would leave her room every night to come to mine and then return to hers before our parents noticed, and that's when I began to suspect that something was going on, something I couldn't explain or describe at that age, and that would make me keep this dark secret. We kept the lights off every time she sneaked out so our parents wouldn't notice, and from the first day we did that, I noticed that my sister had no shadow. That same night, I told her to come close to the window, where the moonlight shone directly on us. My shadow was pronounced on the room, but hers wasn't because she didn't have one. It was as if she wasn't there. I didn't keep it to myself and told her, and to her, it was normal. She said our father had told her that it was normal because she was very special, and that's why she didn't have a shadow. I didn't believe it. No matter how special you might be, how is it possible that with light, there is no shadow reflected? It happens with every material object in the world and with every person. Why not with her? I was surprised at how calm she was. It was completely normal for her, which led me to understand that this hadn't happened for the first time that night, but had been going on for a long time. My parents had never mentioned it to me, and the truth is, they didn't like it when I talked about Elena. I didn't understand why. She was my sister and the person who came closest to understanding me, so it bothered me that they kept us so distant, even in our own home. We didn't dwell on the topic of her shadow for long. We played for about 2 hours, and then she returned to her room. I told her to hide the key well so Mom and Dad wouldn't find it, or we would have a lot of problems. If they found out that she sneaked into my room every night, the punishment would have been severe. I didn't want to think about the possibility of them separating us by sending one of us to live with a relative, so I kept insisting to Elena on how important it was to hide that key well. Several weeks later, our parents were having an important visitor at the house. Elena and I knew what that meant. We were going to be allowed to play in the garden. Yes, that's right. When they had visitors, we could be together for as long as those visitors stayed in the house. While we were in the garden, it occurred to me to ask Elena where she hid the key. My father had made some changes in her room a week earlier, and that night she had come out to play with me. It was then that she told me that hiding it was difficult because Dad checked the cabinets, under the bed, and the entire room too often. So, she confessed to me that she gave the key to a friend, and he gave it to her every night when she sneaked into my room. Elena was 8 years old. What friend could come to our house at midnight to give her that key? I kept asking her questions in that manner. I asked her who that friend was, and she told me that it was one who always stayed by her bedside, watching her until she fell asleep. Elena spoke as if she admired him, but what caught my attention that time was that she told me that her friend told her every week that she would give him something important, and she wouldn't be able to refuse when he asked for it. I asked her the friend's name, but she said she didn't know what his name was because he said that pronouncing it was very dangerous. I thought about telling my parents, but I figured that if they knew about Elena's shadow issue, then they must also know about this person, even if he was helping Elena disobey their orders. However, the matter wasn't going to end there. I asked her what her friend was like and how old he was. I thought Elena was playing a tasteless prank on me when she told me her friend was thousands of years old and that she couldn't describe his appearance because it was very dark and he only appeared as a boy or girl a few times to keep her company. She confessed that her friend had stopped appearing in a childlike form, all because Elena now played with me at night. I asked her if she used to play with him before sneaking out at night, and she said yes. That's where I discovered that 5 years ago, it was her friend who kept her informed about what was happening in the house. She told me he had informed her that I had been in her room to check her things. I was surprised that she remembered something like that if it had happened. Elena was 3 years old at the time, and her memory was incredible to remember something like that so perfectly. We couldn't talk further because the visitor had left, and our parents ordered us to come inside the house immediately. We had spent a lot of time together, so they sent us to our rooms until dinner time, after which we were to go back to sleep. They were very strict with us, and although I knew something was wrong with Elena, I didn't see it as a reason to keep us so far apart. But the truth was, I couldn't ask either, or they would punish me without hesitation. Elena and I counted the hours until midnight came, so we could see each other again and enjoy our favorite part of the day, the end. For the first time since we had started doing this, I opened the door of my room to look at the entrance of Elena's room, waiting for her. I was anxious, and I couldn't sleep. Finally, that door opened, but what was curious is that I didn't see the key on the door handle, and, to make it even stranger, I heard Elena say, "Thank you," just before leaving her room. She saw that I was waiting for her, and she got even more excited. When we entered, I was the one who locked my room with the key, and I asked her to whom she had said thank you. She confessed that her friend had lost the key and had asked her for permission to be the one to open it whenever she asked, and she agreed. I became curious about how her friend would unlock the door without a key, so I told her that if he was here in the house, she should call him to play with us. I didn't think I had gone too far at that point. I didn't have any bad thoughts about her friend since he helped us meet secretly every night. Fortunately, Elena agreed and said she would go tell her friend to come into my room. I had forgotten to remove the lock from the door, and I was surprised when the door opened before Elena touched the handle. When it was fully open, Elena came back to sit with me on the bed and confessed that her friend had said yes and that he was right there with us. I told her to stop joking and that I didn't like those games, and then I saw it. Something that was invisible to my eyes had sat on my bed, right next to Elena. Its weight was evident from the way the sheets wrinkled. Something was sitting there with us, but only Elena could see it. I had realized that something was wrong, that this wasn't normal. Her friend, whatever it was, wasn't human, or at least it couldn't be. It was hard for me to control myself, not to mention the cold. It felt like it was snowing in my room. I tried to keep calm, but that's when I told Elena that it was best if we played just the two of us because it was a game for girls, and boys were not allowed. That's when I saw my sister talking to whatever was there with us, asking it to leave, and then the hollow in our bed disappeared, the mattress returned to normal, and seconds later, my bedroom door closed. I convinced Elena to sleep with me that night, and if our parents found out, I would take the blame for everything, and she wouldn't get in trouble. She agreed, but told me that her friend would be very upset. I told her it didn't matter, that he wouldn't do anything to her, but the truth was, I was very afraid that this thing might return. I couldn't do anything about it if it decided to harm us in the middle of the night. Fortunately, we spent the night without incident, and it was our father who woke us up, furious because we had slept together. Before he could hit me with the belt, I shouted that there was something in Elena's room, and that made him stop. He sat down with me and questioned me, and that's when I told him what had happened the previous night. I tried to hide the fact that she and I had been secretly meeting at night to play, but my father pressed me so much that he forced me to confess. I thought he was going to surprise me with the belt, but instead, he hugged me, crying, and told me between tears that they didn't know how to deal with Elena's friend. She was there, listening to us, and she insisted to Dad that he should calm down and that her friend didn't want to harm her. Mom entered the room and, upon seeing the scene, took Elena out of my room. Dad stayed with me, and that's when he told me. There was something that had attached itself to her since her first birthday, but they didn't know what it was or how to get rid of it. He confessed that they had kept us apart only so that whatever was tormenting her wouldn't torment me, and they wanted to keep me safe since it was the only thing they could do since they had no options to send me away to live with a relative. From then on, the nights were never the same. Before dinner, I told Elena that I no longer wanted her to come to my room at night. I made up an excuse, saying that I was feeling a bit sick and didn't want to infect her, so for her safety, it was best if she stayed away from me until I got better. I thought she would take it well because it showed that I cared, but then came the night. The door of my room opened, and the noise woke me up. I thought Elena was going to come in, but I didn't see her anywhere. The entire second-floor hallway was dark, and I couldn't see anything. Then I heard footsteps approaching me, as if someone was deliberately stopping loudly to make sure I noticed, but the thing was, I couldn't see anything. I assumed it was Elena's so-called friend, so I shouted at it that I had no intention of playing with him or anyone else and that it should leave my room. I was scared, but I trusted that if he was peaceful with Elena, he would be with me too. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It grabbed the sheet from my bed and pulled it out of the room, then did the same with my pillows and toys. I lay down at the head of my bed, with nowhere to go, and all I could do was scream loudly. After several seconds, my father entered the room, running and distressed. When he hugged me tightly, my entire room collapsed. The glass on my dresser shattered, toys were thrown in heaps at us, hitting my father's back as he shielded me. The wooden door splintered, leaving visible claw marks, as if some ferocious animal was doing it. The disturbing scene stopped several seconds later as my tears fell in torrents. The door was now unusable, and in the hallway, we could only see one person, Elena, who entered crying, saying that her friend had turned bad and was asking her for something she didn't want to give. Dad hugged her and asked her what he was asking for, and through tears, Elena confessed that he wanted her soul. It was clear that we were not dealing with just anything, and it wasn't a ghost. Mom had also woken up, and we all stayed in my room until morning. Dad wouldn't let us go for any reason, and that's when I realized that he did love us. He just wanted to protect us from something he couldn't face alone. Mom had friends in the church, so early the next morning, both of them made calls, seeking help, until they were put in touch with a couple who specialized in exorcising demons. Their names were Ed and Lorraine. The church people gave my parents other alternative numbers of people who were going to come and help us since Ed and Lorraine were busy with another case and couldn't handle two at the same time. Unfortunately, the person who was going to help us was in Rome, so it would take a while for him to arrive in the United States. Those days of waiting were horrible. No matter how much my father locked Elena in her room, the door always opened. And even though there was a moment when my father's desperation made him nail the door, it was in vain because, by 3 a.m, and while we heard a terrifying laugh, the nails started to come out on their own. While we waited for our help to arrive, I slept with my parents, and they brought Elena her food in her room. Dad would open the door and leave the plate of food for her while she stood on the bed, looking at him with eyes that no longer belonged to her little Elena. Those nights were even worse. When Dad slept, he had to put boards and nails on the door, which he would remove in the morning because the door would either slam shut or have holes in it, as if someone had pounded it from the outside. We could hardly sleep. Our moments of peace only lasted for minutes before we were tormented again. Finally, the help arrived from Rome 3 weeks later. It was a priest. I don't remember his name very well, but he told us that Ed and Lorraine had talked to them, so he knew the case was very serious, and he was willing to help us get rid of what he called a demon. When he arrived at our house, it was as if whatever was with or inside Elena had become agitated. With the 4 of us in the living room, we could hear strange noises coming from Elena's room, from things being thrown against the wall to Elena screaming for help. It was hard not to go up, but the priest told us it was best if he went first to see what or who he was dealing with. He did so, and we waited for him to come down. We assumed he wanted to enter Elena's room, but we couldn't hear anything else. The house fell completely silent when the priest went up the stairs. Several minutes later, he came down and asked us a series of questions about Elena and her past. My parents told him that they didn't know how this had attached itself to her and that they had tried to seek help, but it had been very difficult. That's when I understood that this wasn't the first time they sought help. I suppose contacting Ed and Lorraine was a stroke of luck for someone to come from Rome to assist us. The priest said that, given the state of my sister, the best he could do was to perform an exorcism, so he would send a request to the Vatican for approval since he couldn't act on his own. I saw my parents pleading with him to do something soon, as we couldn't endure another night with that tormenting Elena. The priest understood and said he would make a call to his superiors to expedite the process, but we would still have to wait until the next day. Before leaving, he blessed us in the house with holy water and anointed oil, marking crosses on the walls and doors of the house. He took longer at the door of Elena's room, saying it would prevent the demon from leaving the room for a while, but the duration would depend on how strong the demon was, and he confessed that, given Elena's condition, it seemed like a very powerful one. We couldn't even imagine how my sister was. We hadn't seen her since we contacted Ed and Lorraine, and we wouldn't see her that night either. When night fell, we remembered that the priest had forbidden us from opening the door of Elena's room, not even to give her food. He said if she was weakened, the demon would be too, and that would help expedite the Vatican's approval for the exorcism the next day. When we went to sleep, we were all in the same room again. Dad didn't hesitate to put the boards and nails back in place, just to be safe. This time, we didn't hear noises hitting the door or scratches on it, but something much worse, much worse. It was Elena's voice, behind the door, crying and begging us to let her in, saying the demon was hurting her. She begged Dad not to leave her little girl alone and that she needed him and that her wounds hurt so much. Only Mom could hold Dad back, as he wanted to go and open the door to help Elena, but based on what the priest had told us, it was highly likely that the one on the other side of the door was not my sister, but the evil that had attached itself to her. Dad was crying desperately, hitting the bed's pillow as Elena's screams grew louder. I covered my ears, but it was impossible not to hear. Then it got worse. We heard Elena scream in pain, and the door splintered, as if someone was hitting it with my dear companion's body. It was hard to imagine that it was a deception, and the three of us began to question the priest's words. Amid Elena's screams, we couldn't contain Dad any longer, and he removed the boards to open the door and found that Elena wasn't on the other side, but when he looked in, her room was open. What the priest had done hadn't lasted long. When Dad tried to close the door of the room where we were, it was too late. Something we couldn't see dragged him into Elena's room, and that's when the door slammed shut. We screamed for Dad many times, but we couldn't even hear him scream. Mom and I locked ourselves in and, as best as we could, put the boards and nails back in place. The next day, when the sun came up, someone was knocking on our door. It was the priest who had come from Rome. Mom had sent him messages all night because he didn't answer the calls. He said he had just seen those messages and asked about Dad. We couldn't answer, so he went to Elena's room and opened it himself. We accompanied him. And upon opening the door, we saw Elena sitting on her bed, with dark circles under her eyes that looked like they were made of ink, red liquid around her mouth, and extremely thin. Dad was in front of the closet, lying there lifeless, having passed away that same early morning. Only our screams and those of my mother could be heard upon realizing that Dad had lost his life, and that it wouldn't have happened if we had prevented him from opening the door. The priest removed Dad's body and told us that before calling the police, he needed to perform the exorcism, but not before calling some people from the church to take care of what was left of Dad. This is where I can affirm that the higher echelons of the Catholic Church have agreements with the government to keep all these cases unnoticed, and people tend to dismiss possession cases lightly. When they arrived, 2 of them stayed in the house to assist the priest in the exorcism they were going to perform on my sister. Mom and I could only pray for everything to go well, and for Elena to be saved. Before starting, the priest asked us the time when what happened to Dad occurred, and Mom replied that it was at 3 in the morning. Then I told the priest that at that time, Elena would always leave her room to come to mine and play. The priest discussed it with those present to assist him, and they decided that the exorcism would be performed at that very hour, as the demon would be tempted to appear, and that's when they would seize the opportunity to send it back to hell. Fortunately for us, neither the priest nor his assistants left the house. We didn't want to be alone due to the intense fear we felt, and they understood that, so we waited there until the time for the exorcism arrived. When it was already midnight, the priest and those who would assist him were prepared to do everything possible to save my sister's soul and put an end to that horrible episode in our lives. They told us we could be present only if we used some crucifixes that the priest provided us with. This would prevent the demon or demons inhabiting my sister's body from attaching to any of us. When we entered Elena's room, she was sitting on the bed again, but staring at us. She was already waiting for us, that was obvious. The room's lights worked perfectly, but nonetheless, the priest's assistants had lamps in case they failed. The priest, holding a thick, silver crucifix, anointed with holy water, led the way. He began reciting prayers and invocations that caused my sister to wriggle on the bed. As the priest spoke to her, she screamed more and more, pleading for help from my mother and me. The assistants told us not to pay attention, that it wasn't my sister but the demon trying to deceive us into helping it. It was difficult to hold back. We were seeing her right at that moment. For us, it was Elena who was screaming, but deep down, we knew we shouldn't intervene, and they were there to help us. We believed the priest had everything under control, but things took a turn for the worse when Elena lay down on the bed and began to levitate. She hardly seemed to be breathing, and the priest didn't stop. He kept praying until he started speaking in a language unknown to my mother and me. Then he climbed onto the bed while his assistants prayed simultaneously with him. We knew these people were trained for this, but what they were doing didn't seem to be of any use. Elena showed no signs of improvement, and the demon showed no sign of leaving. Several minutes passed like this, and then Elena collapsed on the bed. We thought it was all over, but it wasn't. Elena opened her eyes, stood up, and started speaking to the priest in a language unknown to us and seemingly to the others as well. That voice wasn't Elena's. It was as if multiple people with a very deep voice were speaking simultaneously, but it all came from her mouth. We watched the priest step away from the bed and say that the demon was too strong, and no matter what he did, he couldn't remove the demon from Elena, and that he would contact Ed and Lorraine to come as soon as possible. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Before we left the room, there was a muffled scream from Elena, and this time it was her voice. Everything in her body had changed. The bruises on her arms and legs had disappeared, but only those. The dark circles remained, and she was still very thin. The priest approached her, and seconds later, he held my sister's lifeless body in his hands. The exorcism had not only failed, but the demon had become enraged, and before leaving, it exacted its toll on my sister's life. Mom erupted in anger at the priest and his assistants, but the truth is that she and Dad should have never stopped seeking help. Later, the same priest explained to us that the demon had attached itself too strongly to Elena, and if it didn't claim her life, the exorcism would. The only consolation they could offer us was that they performed several sessions of prayers and blessings over Elena's body because the priest believed the demon had taken her life but hadn't taken her soul. With that, we held on to the hope that at least the souls of my sister and my father had found their way to heaven. We lost them both, and Mom was never the same. It was difficult for me to communicate with her. After what happened, we sold the house and moved to another city. We never experienced anything paranormal again. Through the radio and newspapers, we learned that the so-called Ed and Lorraine had become famous and were the best in the world at combating demons. I wish they had given us the opportunity to come and fight whatever was haunting us. Perhaps with their help, my sister and father would still be alive, but it seemed that at that time, we weren't the only ones who needed them. Honestly, it was very hard for us to continue with our lives. Throughout all those chilling days, the possibility that they could have been saved, but things didn't go in our favor, was always in our minds. Not a day has passed in my 65 years that I don't remember Elena. It was undoubtedly the most terrifying experience I lived through, and I know perfectly well that I'm not the only one. There are thousands of cases we don't know about, but they continue to happen today. Thank you very much for reading my story.